So next we have Lucas Smith. I first met Lucas when he was at Airbnb, and at the time, he and his team were, I would say, one of the most advanced teams in really figuring out how to use design systems, how to get teams to be more efficient, how to get them to communicate better. And since then, he's moved on to other things. And I thought he was going to give a talk about design systems because he knows a ton about that. But it turns out he's talking about something else that is really true, near and dear to my heart, which is about states and about how you can use this language of states to express things to the rest of your team. And so, Lucas, do you need to set your computer up?
Hey, everybody. That went a pip long, so I think I'm here. All right, I assume my slides are on the thing. The talk is called States of Product Love Language, right? It's kind of a weird topic for designers, but it's a concept that we sort of, as designers, don't realize we use all the time. It's abstracted out of our tools, away in our tools, maybe is the right way to say that. And every prototyping tool allows you to use states. We just don't think about it that way. And I'm going to talk about this. This feels like really high level once I started getting into writing this talk. So I started to break it down further. So I'm not going to talk as much about state charts themselves. I'll highlight that, but we'll get there. So first, who am I? You should definitely ask that about everybody. And with me, take it with a grain of salt. In my 20s, I spent all my time trying to work less and do weird stuff more. But I kind of failed or succeeded or whatever. So then I ended up here in the Bay Area working on product stuff. I sort of merged my love for doing weird things and mashing code and design together into a career. Who knew? My parents definitely didn't. So I worked at Airbnb. I currently contract with a couple folks like Splunk and Thumbtack. And in the past, I've worked on systems at Turner and AT&T as well. And I really started as a front-end developer. That was where I came from college. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I actually think that we should be designing in the materials we push out, and I'll talk more about that. So state is a weird topic, right? Because it means lots of things. A bunch of people were are you going to talk about where people work? Or geographically? And the answer is no. But it's really funny to say this thing out loud, so I'm going to say it because I get a chuckle every time. State is the result of application context. Subsequently, any interaction affects that state. And as designers, that's really high level, and that's the place where you need an engineer to solve it with code. And it's painful even just to write that down. So I'm going to try to break it down into bite-sized pieces so we can talk about it. And yeah, so imagine saying that to your parents when you're trying to help them log into Facebook or something, and you're well, I think you're logged out, and this is how state works. They would punch you in the face. Well, at least that's how my dad would do. Anyway, so I went to my wife, who's a therapist. And I was I'm going to get this quote from you for my talk because, I really think you'll be able to distill it down to something that's reasonable, that's not some very high level, from a textbook. So I talked her through the first couple slides, and she told me I'm an idiot. So that's it. That's the slide. So that's how it is. And you're probably thinking the same thing. This guy's an idiot. But we draw rectangles, not states, as designers. But I would argue hopefully we're actually drawing products. And I think this is where we dig into two mental models that happen when we're building products. The first is a declarative mindset. And this is kind of the product mind. Your product manager thinks like this. They might say something I want my user to be able to log in at this point, right? And all they care about is the outcome. They don't care how you get there. All they want to know is that this person can sign up at this point. So they're going to explore based on the outcome, and that's sort of a higher order thinking. And that's where your engineers want to be as well, right? They want to be in this declarative mindset so they can write clean code that makes sense, that's abstracted enough so the next time they look at it, it's reasonable. But there's another mindset that we use, as designers, which is the imperative, right? So everyone at the PM level says to you, and like this is a generalization, maybe this isn't how you work, but I think this happens a lot. The imperative is like the software mind, like you have to like identify every single step to achieve that outcome. So you draw a bunch of screens on an endless canvas, right? And you think to yourself, okay, I need to enter this information before I can submit that button, so I got to draw this screen next to that screen next to that screen. And you start to explore the problems based on like exactly what happens. But you really want to be thinking at this higher level, and this is like this declarative mind, which is like exploring the problem based on their intended outcome, instead of like composing actions that they need to use to get to that outcome. But you have to do both as a designer. In declarative thinking, I'll dig a little bit deeper, but I think this comes down to like the models, right? This model is obviously like a flowchart. Think about someone coming in and saying like a table for two at a restaurant, right? You don't care where the table is or who last ate at the table or like if it's being cleared or not, you just want to go sit. And I can hear my PM, I used to work with a PM for like 3 or 4 years. He was like a founder and he had a lot of very strong opinions. And he would say things like this. He would say, I want to be able to do this. And he would draw a flowchart, but it would be like 2 things, right? And it would always be like, well, I have to draw between here and there, so let me go and do my drawings, and then we'll come back to flowchart world, and we'll keep sort of like traversing this hierarchy. And I think like that's where it gets tricky, right? Flowcharts are perfect for this. They're really zoomed out, they're really fuzzy, and it makes the world feel frictionless. But once you start to abstract away like how, you start to focus on like what exactly is going to happen in each individual step, and then that gets your team on the whole same path, and then you can rough scope the whole thing. So it's a powerful metaphor, but it doesn't do the whole job, right? I mean, it would be great if it did. But then you get into this like imperative thinking world, right? Like the software needs to know how things happen. And this is where like starting to think about states creeps in. You draw the screen to communicate the how, and that's like traditionally like what we've done to bring graphic designers into interaction design. This is the place where everyone says like, you know, make the logo bigger. Like, this is the world where graphic design met us about 15, 20 years ago. And I think we're still like reeling from this in our tools. We still draw these screens at this like pixel perfect fidelity, and like no product is actually pixel perfect. But we still have to do this work to identify like exact steps to achieve the outcome. And we start to draw these screens in like incredible detail. And then like we hand off this click-through prototype as the artifact. But a click-through prototype becomes very much like a declarative mindset, right? But ultimately, software is hard. Artifacts from designers are incomplete like by design. You don't want to spend like forever in design phase. I know I've done that at some companies, and it's a real bummer when it happens. So we started to talk about this double diamond of design process, and I think that's actually misleading. I think we're constantly traversing this declarative mindset and this imperative mindset. And I'm here to say that like, as designers, you should feel okay about that it takes you time to switch between like drawing a screen and connecting a bunch of screens together. Because really it's like recursive, like each step is another double diamond. Like you explore, you refine, you explore, you refine. And that makes being a designer hard, right? But I think if you really break these 2 things down, you start to see like where you should be using these mental models. So like the imperative is really about like having empathy for the user and understanding like how to deliver on the expectations that the user has of you. And then the declarative is like saying, oh, it works, right? So again, software is hard. Like, is this the buggy one? I heard about the buggy one. Da, da, da. No? Should I? All right, so my clicker's not working, unfortunately. Does anyone have any? Oh, there we go. All right, we went backwards, so now we can go forward. Perfect. So we build models. Models serve like so many purposes, and as designers, we're actually model builders. Now my, oh boy, there we go, all right. This is great. Making models separates product design from like other types of design. For instance, like the output of the design process is like only gonna inform what gets built. It doesn't actually build the thing. This is very much like architecture. Like an architect doesn't like make the wood. They don't even deliver the wood. They just tell you what wood to use. And like these models serve lots of purposes throughout the whole process. And ultimately, like the prototype mode mind that we get into is modeling, right? But you need to draw to do that, so you're back in the imperative. And you're always switching between these two mental models. But I think actually knowing the difference is really powerful for designers. When I've talked to designers about this, they always gloss over this idea that we're constantly context switching. But context switching is like why we're designers, I think, that we have like a proclivity for it. And really, when we're designing, we're actually also making models. So just like keep that in mind, and we'll get there. Don't worry. All right. So now here we are at Statecharts. Woohoo! The thing everyone came here for, right? Maybe, maybe not. Anywho, Statecharts are like a really comprehensive model of a system. This one that we've got right here is like a simple toggle, like a light switch. You can turn it on, you can turn it off. It's got a default state of off. And when you go from off to on, there's these transitions, right? Really simple. You can't mess that up. If you handed that to an engineer, they'd go, yes, I can build that in an instant. And I think it's really interesting, right? The output, which is like when you're in off, the output of tapping it is on, is the result of actually like interacting, and not the events that fire as a result of touch or focus. I'm going to show some more like behind glass ones in a second. But this formal syntax is great, right? Imagine if you could look at your whole product like this. You could like build a model of the whole thing, and then you could hand it to your engineer, and they would build the exact right thing, right? We all know that always works. But like, can you imagine like trying to design all of Facebook like this, like just a million state charts that are infinitely nestable? That's probably a bad idea. So you get into this world of what they call state explosion. Have you ever made like a really big click-through prototype in something like Figma or InVision, and you look at it like a month later and you're like, what even happened here? Like, I can't even make sense of this anymore. Or even sort of like trying to solve a problem when you've got a problem in the prototype. Like going back to the drawing mode is extremely difficult. I actually think Figma does a good job of this by like giving you very clearly two modes, but it's still hard. It's really hard. But ultimately, like this is a mess, and we should work to solve it. And I think that like after really doing a deep dive on this, I think that state charts in their existing format is like way overkill. Like if you were going to even do this for something like an onboarding flow, it would be like, you might as well just build it. Let's be perfectly honest. But somewhere around like the compound component world in like a design system, you can actually do this, and you could call it a finite state machine and say, this is what like I want my engineer to build. So something like a media player or even like a small form really works, and you could build a model like this and get exactly what you want and know it can never be in the wrong weird state or anything, which is cool. But here's me adding like mouse and touch events, and like this is where it really gets screwy. Because now we're like, oh, there's mouse over, mouse out, tap, there's this selected state, this is all behind glass, so like I need like pointer events. Like this gets much crazier than like a light switch, right? And honestly, like states times transitions like turns into like an absolute mess. But like these transitions are like this mouse out and mouse over. And this is where like in UI design, you have an opportunity, right? Like this is where you put the magic stuff. And that's why I'm talking to designers about state, because I really think there's an opportunity here to harvest like some magic to put into your UIs by thinking about all of the potential states of any given thing you design. So yeah, that's interesting. But like ultimately, like transitions are that UI gold, right? Like you see this like thing, it forces you into this feedback loop of being really happy and loving hitting that like button because like it's beautiful and it responds to your touch. And we want users to feel that we want them to feel accomplished. We want them to really like love it. So this is just transitioning between states. And if you're designing an interface and you know that these transitions exist, it's really easy to go, hey, engineer, let's sit down together and really think and like make magic. I think that this is awesome. And maybe some old school diagramming might pay dividends. I don't know. But it's really like this is the imperative mindset to like enumerate those states. Like how can we do both of those things? Yeah. So I don't have any answers, by the way. I'm just a guy. All right. So components are like finite state machines, and like I was trying not to say that early in the talk, and I already did, so I'm a little embarrassed. But like, what granularity works for state charts? Like, components work beautifully with state charts. And I think we could define all the states of like all the design systems and not rely on hundreds of disparate design systems and only build the components that we need. And now you all know about finite state machines. You can put it on your LinkedIn, and I'll endorse you. So like, where do we find components, right? Like, head scratcher. I think the next talk might be about design systems. But now that we know that components are finite state machines, like where do we get them? We get them in design tools, and we get them in design systems, right? And I think that this is where this gets cool. This was like where the magic starts to happen. Is a design system really just about efficiency and consistency? I'm going to tell you the answer is no. Design systems are like surface of the sun hot right now, so I had to throw this in here and talk about it. I work on design systems, it made sense. But I don't think the real benefits are actually consistency and efficiency. I think those are like first order benefits. And design systems are actually like gateway drugs to us getting like way better tools, right? If we can all like stand on this one scaffold of design systems, we can design way more interesting stuff. And an industry-wide rigor, like, and if we all agree to like build on each other's work, this becomes incredibly powerful. And we're going to go ahead and veer off course. So I'm going to start talking about like what we can do with that. Design systems are structure, and sometimes that feels limiting. Like a Twitter troll recently called UI designers or product designers scrapbookers recently. And like, maybe there's some truth there, right? Like, we are just dragging and dropping things into space. But like, imagine like if we didn't have paper and we had to make that every time we had to build something, like that would really suck. Oh, I made the paper, now we can make the thing. So like, I actually think this is like, this convergence is actually really, really good. And I think Twitter trolls are always funny. But another thing I think is really important is that like screen interaction is completely finite. Like, there aren't going to be any new UI paradigms that show up, no matter how hard we try to invent some new thing for screens with like touch or pointers. Like, we're not going to do it before like the next paradigm comes, right? I've been contracting with a bunch of design systems teams, and like everyone's really doing the same thing, and it's really a human problem more than it's like a design problem. But we all insist on still designing the same system over and over and over again, and building it over and over and over again. But I think we know the surface of screen UIs at this point. And anything that's custom to your business, like go ahead, go crazy and design that yourself. But most things aren't. Like, we can all agree what a button does and all the states that go into it, right? So maybe everyone could share. I don't know. And I think like this is where we get into me being sort of like a socialist, communist person. And I think we could all work together as an industry to make all of our lives better. Like, why am I sitting in my room trying to guess every possible state of this one thing every time I draw it? There's hundreds of design systems, and like maybe my drawing tool should understand that a thing is a button. Show, I'm looking at you on this one. But like maybe the texture of a button is different than the texture of a rectangle, right? Maybe my system can be intelligent enough to understand like what that means, and when I put it inside something else, what that means for everything else. Maybe it should block the interaction with something if we're waiting on a network call, right? I think we could have this in our tools, and I don't think it's that far-fetched. Like, let's imagine a world, right? I think every tool is trying. I know that like this was FramerX's intention, was to give everyone a store where you could just grab components and build your own UI. And I think that like XD is incorporating states and a bunch of other things, and I think this should be coming soon to like lots of tools. I'm really excited for this world where we build this scaffolding, but I also think it takes away like our thinking time as designers. Drawing a button is like a really cathartic experience. Like, I, as much as anyone else, likes to get stoned and draw buttons. Like, it's absolutely joyous, right? But maybe that's not the best use of my time all the time. I don't know. Anyway, I made a joke last night at the speaker dinner with Dylan about announcing a feature today, like that I was just going to announce a feature and you would have to do it. And this is where I was going to do it, and I'm not going to do that, though. So anyway, that was just a note to myself, because I thought it was really, really fun. But I think there's lots of open questions, right? Like, I didn't answer anything for you in this talk. I just posed some questions about some old computer science ideas that I happened to go dig around in because I was working in a React library that I thought was interesting. But I think there's lots of open questions, right? What's our like fidelity to release something to engineering? Like, what is release or handoff or whatever you want to call it? Like, why do we call it that? Why do we think like that? We should challenge these things. I don't think there's any solution in me saying, hey, states are a thing. But I do think it's enough to sort of spawn you to think about, like, what does state mean for design tools, like in a design tool? And I think it's all unsolved, right? But I'd love to push on this more in the future. And I'd love to really get way smarter about like the materials that we're designing with, because I think that's where the magic is going to come into play, is when we start to think about, like, as designers, do we draw things? What percentage of the things do we draw? I don't know. I'd love to never draw a rectangle again, personally. But let's recap. We should really not forget that we're model makers at the very least, right? Like, everything we do is a model. Every screen you draw is a model. And I'm saying, like, let's up the fidelity of the model by layering on some cool stuff. And these are mental models that you can retain in your workflow, right? Like this idea of like imperative versus declarative thinking. And your engineers will be really hyped to hear that, right? And so will your product manager, likely. But also, like, go and find some transitions and like make your users really happy. I think there's lots of room there in the current space. Also, like, let's start digging into the past. I had this conversation with Nico from Figma recently about how the book that I sort of pulled a lot of this state chart stuff from was really like kind of rude about designers. It had this very hard deadline between the two, right? Like, designers, it says in the book, designers stop reading here. And if you read it in today's context, so much of what's in the engineering part is actually stuff we do as designers. And I don't think that this book is the only one that did this. So I think that we have lots of opportunities to, like, during this, like, the end of this tech cycle, which we're like clearly in the end of a tech cycle, there's like going to be some time between now and the next interaction paradigm. It feels a lot like 2006 when we have an opportunity to like rethink what our jobs are and how we work together. And UI design in general, right? Like, if we all know the surface of screens, like, there's no sense in us all drawing screens all the time. Anyway, I think there's magic in this old stuff. And I think we can like really unlock like what experience design should be, and like maybe not draw any more rectangles, hopefully. Fingers crossed. Yeah, that's my talk. I'm Lucas. If you want to grab me and ask me about something weird, I'll be there. Yeah.